And welcome. We are live streaming across the internet right now on 12 or so platforms. We thank everybody for being here. We've got a great episode in store for you. Joining me today is Todd Achilles, former Idaho state legislator. Used to lead the Democrat caucus there, but he's now a U.S. Senate candidate as an independent. And we're going to be talking about the independent movement across the country, as well as could independence help reshape the U.S. Senate, and talk about what's called the fulcrum strategy, which I think will be interesting. Talk about what it takes to be an independent and to run. Also, he's a former tank commander in the U.S. Army. We'll be talking about Iran and his views on that. Also, where there's agreement across the political spectrum on the ideas, he calls it a rigged economy. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. It is fascinating to see what happens if you are an independent running for office. We have a lot of U.S. Senate candidates right now who are independents in states that could change the math a little bit. Also, if you are watching right now, that means you're on the social media site and you are getting the live stream notification. Thank you for doing that. So please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever your favorite podcast platform is, or your favorite social media platform. Click that little bell and you'll be notified whenever we go live. And then you can join the conversation, drop questions and comments, and we'll bring you into the conversation. We do appreciate that. And then also we're releasing new U.S. Senate polls. We had one come out last week in a very important primary, and then we have another one coming out this week, and we have more over the coming weeks. You can check that out at pollingclub.com. We have free members, we have paid members, and you get to have a say in what questions we ask and what topics we cover. I want to talk a little bit about Iran and polling. I was on Newsmax this morning, and we talked a little bit about what is going on with Iran polling. John McLaughlin, who's Trump's pollster, was on with me. They released a new poll. I talk about that, but also the Harvard-Harris poll, which, based on what you see in the media, things aren't exactly like what you might think. So without further ado, I'm going to show you a clip of that while we wait for people to stream in this morning.
We turn to you, the American people, and what you think about Trump's second term, the war in Iran, and its impacts on our country. And here to break some of that down, the latest polls, pollster for American Post Research and Polling, host of the Political Trade Secrets podcast, Dustin Olson, along with pollster for McLaughlin Associates, Trump pollster John McLaughlin.
And Dustin, AP's recent poll, speaking with Republicans on what's important in the war with Iran, 63% favor airstrikes against Iran's military, similar favor towards strikes on Iranian leaders. But when it comes to funding the Israeli military and deploying ground troops, as you can see, not everyone is on board. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, when you get into the details, that's where you start to see differences between voters and what they think. But really on the core issues, whether Iran can get a nuclear weapon, whether you want to stop them from funding terrorism around the world, Americans are pretty clear about their core beliefs, and they have been for years. And I do think that that's critical. And you can also see in the polling, and I even saw this in John's poll, it's very clear that the American media has an impact on what people are thinking. And when you're able to make the case to them, that support grows. But generally, when you look at good polls like John's, and you look at the Harvard-Harris poll also, it's a slight majority of Americans that actually do support what we've done in Iran. And if the administration can get the message out and can be clear about why we're doing this, and can actually get through the media filter, that it's very clear from his poll and others that that support actually does increase. All right, and that was myself with John McLaughlin on Wake Up America on Newsmax. If you're streaming in right now, we are about to start our program, Political Trade Secrets, with Todd Achilles, Independent U.S. Senate candidate from Idaho, and we'll be talking about the independent movement, how there are a number of U.S. Senate races across the country right now that do have credible independents running that could change the math in the U.S. Senate. Back to the polling there, McLaughlin's poll was 51% approve of military action, but the Harvard-Harris poll also had it at 51%. This is something that is happening in some of these polls, and there's a discrepancy based on what poll you look at. If you look at the Real Clear Politics average of polls, and there is whether it's adults or if it's registered voters or if it's likely voters, there's a discrepancy of 12 points to anyway, the show.
Welcome to Political Trade Secrets, an inside look at campaigns and politics, where we pull back the curtain, look under the hood, and investigate all aspects of politics and how elections are won. Now, here's your host, Dustin Olson.
Pollster and host of the Political Trade Secrets podcast, Dustin Olson.
Dustin Olson.
Dustin Olson.
And Dustin Olson, pollster at American Pulse.
They work for both Republicans and Democrats. And he hosts a podcast, Political Trade Secrets. Oh, we love that. We like that podcast.
Now from Washington, D.C. is pollster Dustin Olson.
And welcome to Political Trade Secrets. I'm your host, Dustin Olson. It's great to have all of you here today from around the internet on every different podcast platform and all the different social media. If you're watching the live stream, thank you for joining us live. And please do post a question or comment at any time during the show. And we'll try our best to bring that into the dialogue. Also, if you like the show and you'd like to help out, do follow, like, and subscribe on whatever platform you enjoy podcasts. That makes a big difference. Today, we have a great show. We have Todd Achilles. He's an independent candidate for U.S. Senate in Idaho. And his candidacy is important for that state. But what I'm really interested in, I think our audience can be interested in, is understanding the independent movement. There are candidates across the country in different states that are running and making credible, campaigns to get elected. And we now have two declared independents in the U.S. Senate. So we'll be talking about that. One of the things that is interesting, actually, as many of you know, the polling club, if you go to pollingclub.com, you can find out more about this. But we have our polling club at American Pulse, where we have been doing U.S. Senate races across the country. We've been asking questions that are important to those races, finding out who's going to win primaries. And one of the things that we did recently is we did in neighboring Montana, we did a survey to find out if Seth Bodner, who is an independent candidate for U.S. Senate there, what the likelihoods of his candidacy against incumbent Senator Daines, who within a week and a half after our poll actually dropped out and is no longer running. So that changes that race quite a bit. But this is something that we've been interested in watching. And if you go to pollingclub.com, you can be a part of our polling club. You can help decide what questions we ask. You can help give us direction as to where we want to do our surveys. And you can either do that as a free member, or you can also become a premium and have a little bit more of the details as to what's going on in these races. And we have a few more coming out in the next few weeks, largely in primary races, to see kind of what the complexion of the Republican caucus might look like after this year. So go to pollingclub.com to check that out. But again, joining me today is Todd Achilles. He's a U.S. Army veteran, former Idaho state legislator, and of course, independent candidate for U.S. Senate. Todd served as a tank commander in the Middle East, then went on to a career in tech and telecom, serving in leadership roles and executive roles at places like T-Mobile, Hewlett-Packard, HTC, and Avoca. He later served in the Idaho House, where he was part of the minority, and it's not a large minority there, and it quickly became the leader of their Democrat caucus. And we'll find out with him, like, when he decided to leave the Democrat Party and become an independent. Also, he teaches public policy for a number of higher education institutions. So with that, I want to bring in our guest, Todd Achilles. Todd, great to have you here today.
Hey, good to be here, Dustin. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned to the audience, you were a tank commander. You've served in the Middle East, I believe, 2 tours. And tell us a little bit about that. Like, why did you decide to join the military, and maybe what you have learned from that you've been able to bring into your professional life?
Yeah. No, I joined the Army right after college, and when you're a skinny 5'9" kid getting out of college, being in a tank is actually pretty good duty. I think growing up, I'm a farm kid from Oregon. There's a history of public service in my family, and just serving in the military seemed like the natural next step. And listen, I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot in those years on active duty. I did a couple of years in the Guard when I was out. We standing in front of your troops when you're getting ready to deploy overseas, it makes very clear our system of government, right? And the role and the responsibilities of civilian leadership, of being, as we used to say in the Army, tactically and technically proficient.
Mhm.
And those are just lifelong skills that you take with you when, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah. A discipline that makes a difference, I'm sure, in the day-to-day campaign as you're in right now. Right now we are active in the Middle East as a country, and one of the things that we've done a lot of polling at American Pulse is we've done a lot of polling on national security issues over the years, especially since October 7th. And one thing that's really clear in our polling, 76%. It's been the same in most other polls, about three-quarters. Americans believe very strongly that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon, and 70% of Americans believe that they would have used one if they were to get one. So here we are. We're about 3 weeks and a few days into conflict with Iran. From your experience in the Middle East, what's your impression, and what would you have to say about it?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the worst regimes in the world, and we have to be aggressive about what we're doing to keep them from having the bomb. And I completely agree with that sentiment. That being said, military operations are hard, right? And you need to look ahead on these. You need to plan for it. And I think the most important thing is that when we deploy the military, we do it with the public support.
Yeah.
And we've seen time and time again in American history, when you don't have that American support, you can't sustain these. These become unpopular conflicts. And so one of the big criticisms I have for my opponent, he's chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Jim Risch, incredibly important role, right? I mean, when the founders set up our system of government, and when they were thinking about foreign affairs, and foreign affairs is really hard, right? Because it operates outside the realm of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And in Federalist 75, it couldn't have been more clear that it was the role of the Senate and the executive and the White House to work together on foreign affairs issues, because it's so difficult. And what you see is we're not having those public debates. We're not scrutinizing, and you can agree or disagree with what's going on in Iran, but it's important to have the public on board, and that's the role of the Senate in these hearings. And that's not happening, and I think that's a huge miss. And for me, for somebody who's deployed, I know what it's like to be on a plane heading to the Middle East. There's 5,000 Idahoans on active duty, and we owe it to them to make sure we're following the intent of the founders and having these hearings.
Yeah. So your contention is mostly that the Senate is not having any kind of conversations whatsoever.
Yeah, that they're not, and I think they're not. We're missing the opportunity to ask these hard questions, and I think those hard questions make these operations better.
Yeah.
And it's clear we've missed a bunch of stuff, right? I mean, we're still deploying troops now. We called for the evacuation of American expats in the region a couple days after, flights were shut down. I mean, you just go down the list, and it was clear just operationally we're missing a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah. How so?
I mean, just look at what's going on, and deploying, I think a second Marine unit. Discussions about deploying the 82nd if it hasn't gone already. These units probably should have already been forward deployed. We probably should have warned Americans earlier that it's time to exit the region. Our inability to stop these cheap Shahed drones that we know. I mean, there have been, the Ukrainians have figured out how to stop them. We haven't put any of those defensive in place, and we're kind of scrambling now. I mean, these are the sorts of things that clearly were missed in the planning for this, and these are hard operations, right?
So your contention is you have a sense that the Pentagon wasn't planning for these various contingencies.
Yeah, I mean, clearly a bunch of things were missed, and maybe because they pulled the trigger on this operation quickly, but still, I mean, at the end of the day, you got to have the American people on board.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, one of the problems with that is the media coverage is 100% one-sided. And when I say 100%, it's about 96% negative, which as a pollster, we know that public opinion is going to be affected by that. My impression is that the Pentagon has plans upon plans upon plans. And of course, as you know, isn't it, I can't remember if it was Patton or if it was Eisenhower said that no plan is survives the first strike, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Something like that.
obviously you plan, but then things do change.
Yeah.
What am I correct about the idea that the Pentagon does have plans upon plans upon plans?
Oh, they do, and there's a gazillion contingencies that they're planning for. And listen, there's a bunch of really smart people running around the Pentagon, but there's the military operation, and then there's the civilian support or justification for the military operation. And listen, if folks in the Senate agree with the military operation, great. Then let's have those hearings and let's have those conversations. And honestly, I think that would be a better way for the American people to hear about the pros and cons of something through a Senate hearing than maybe what they're hearing through the media. But you cannot not have those conversations. That is outside of what the founders' intent was.
So moving into the rest of your biography, so you leave the military, and is at that time that you moved into the tech world? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And what was it that, like, how did that happen, and what drew you to that?
Well, it's kind of funny, Dustin. So when I served in the 90s. So when I got out, I had a career counselor. This was the Kindler Chetler Army, so I was stationed at Fort Stewart outside of Savannah, Georgia, and so I went to my career counselors, all the steps you need to do when you're getting out, and she's like, "Now, son, what's your MOS?" I'm like, "I'm a 19 kilo, ma'am." So she looks through the big book of Army MOSs and she goes down the list, and 19 kilo, tank commander, civilian equivalent, none. So she looked at me and she said, exactly. Oh my goodness, son, what are you going to do? And I, I had already been accepted to business school, and I was like, yeah, I'm fine. But one of the things I did learn, we were fielding new radios in our tanks at the time, and it was similar to kind of the original digital wireless, mobile wireless technology. So I was able to talk my way into a wireless industry job in the early days of T-Mobile, and I just had a great run. Got 4 patents. Did a bunch of really cool stuff in the early days of wireless and early smartphones and 4G and 5G networks and everything else. Really enjoyed it. Ran one of the global business units at Hewlett Packard. Did business all over the world. Saw exactly how the Chinese do business, and after 20 plus years of doing that, decided it was time to return to public service.
Yeah. With that experience, any insights that you'd have to how China does business, and maybe what the U.S. Senate should know about that?
Oh, yeah, a lot. I mean, I think the short version is what the Chinese are doing is weaponizing zero margin capitalism. And they can sustain that because they take a top-down, very status approach to it. We don't. And I think the financialization of the American industrial capacity, where we used to be 40% of industrial capacity in the 60s, and now we're down to 13, and China's now over 40. That is a massive national security risk. We've got to bring manufacturing back. And listen, manufacturing is hard, it's dirty, it doesn't have huge margins, and we can't let Wall Street just chase margins at the expense of our national security and American workers. And I'll just add to this, you're right outside of Boise, Micron, one of the largest memory makers in the world, is building the first new American memory fab in over 30 years. Wow. And it's a massive structure. And it got funded as a result of the CHIPS Act, or it didn't. The CHIPS Act didn't fund it, but the CHIPS Act sort of made it easier for them to pull this project off. They've got a second fab underway. They've got room for 2 more on top of that. That's exactly what we need to be doing. We've got to bring this industrial capacity back to the U.S. And I think, things like the CHIPS Act are really just leveling the playing field with what the Taiwanese and the Koreans and others do.
Interesting. And what else would you do to help bring manufacturing back into the U.S.?
We just, I think a lot of it, is private equity decision making, where we have little to no consequences for getting rid of American jobs. If it's just driving profit, and we aren't calculating those other societal and security impacts, we just need to change the equation on this. Again, I saw this at HP. We used to build all of our stuff here in the U.S. and slowly over time, starting in the 80s and really accelerating in the 90s, and then just kind of reached this peak in the 2000s. All of that industrial capacity, all of that manufacturing went overseas. it just went to these kind of third-party contract manufacturers.
Yeah.
Because it was cheaper, labor was cheaper, and then what happened is that all of that, everything that you need for all of these supply chains went overseas.
Yep.
And now it's because all those supply chains have shifted primarily to East Asia. Now it's really hard to pull that manufacturing back because you've got to pull the supply chains back with it. Fortunately, we're seeing this with like the Micron example. You got a whole bunch, and Micron's got an incredibly complex supply chain, lots of suppliers.
Yep.
They're starting to set up shop in Boise. So the right things are happening, but you just can't, we can't just have this relentless chasing of profits. And listen, I've run billion-dollar P&Ls. I know exactly the decision-making that's happened, but you can't foreclose these bigger issues on the impact to the country and the impact to our security. And we really need to take this stuff seriously.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever read Peter Schweitzer's book, Blood Money. I'd recommend you check it out if you haven't. But it's largely about what you're talking about, in particular with China. And what happens with a lot of the companies is that they actually start becoming a little bit sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party. You have some of these big tech folks over there going to party meetings and saying nice things about the party leaders. Unfortunately, because they've become so connected because of their supply chain to those interests. So that becomes a real problem. We want companies that want America to be successful, and I think that's important. And we can't continually have a trade deficit like we've had over the years. And a lot of that's it's improved, but there's a lot more work to be done. So you had decided at one point to run for the state house there in Idaho, and you ran as a Democrat, and not a large minority there. Tell us a little bit what had you actually decide to run, and then tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, it started with there was an opening in the Idaho legislature in my neighborhood in Boise. I raised my hand and I got appointed by Governor Little. I became one of 9 Democrats in the Idaho House, and I would joke with my friends, I just got the worst job in the world. I'm a Democrat in the Idaho House, but I really enjoyed serving. I had a reputation as being one of the most bipartisan in the building. When I ran for re-election, I won 60% of the vote in a district that's only 25% Dem. And I tell you, Dustin, the number one thing I heard when I was knocking on Republican doors is, "Wow, Todd, you're a better Republican than that other person on the ballot." And I think that just, that really informed, how I seek to represent, the folks of Idaho and seek to participate in government, which is you got to do it. You can always find opportunities to work across the aisle, to put good ideas together, and it is all about being bipartisan. The longest serving and probably the most popular governor in Idaho history was a Democrat, Cecil Andrus. And then the second is a Republican, Butch Otter. But if you look at a Venn diagram, I mean, there's a ton of overlap between those two. And I think that's a tradition out west of where, Republicans and Democrats work really well together. And it's why there's such a huge independent population in Idaho too. It's just that sort of those are our core values.
What's it like in the Idaho legislature? So you had a pretty small minority. First of all, how did you become you were the head of the Democrat caucus? Is that right?
I was in the House. I was. Yep.
Yeah. And was that you pulled the shortest straw, or what?
I think it's probably that, Dustin.
Yeah.
It's what's interesting is that there's really 5 caucuses in the Idaho House. There's 2 far right caucuses. There's really aggressive small government caucus. And then I'd say there's sort of the old traditional Idaho Republican, a lot of my LDS colleagues. So there's 4 caucuses on the Republican side, and then you have the Democratic caucus. And so we would, we kind of played it like a parliamentary system. On some things, maybe on commercial issues, there was, issues around concentrated corporate power, monopolies. We'd partner with our far right colleagues on those because they dislike monopolies as much as I did. On other issues, maybe more social issues, we'd probably align with our LDS colleagues. And it just depends. But you're always looking for those opportunities to partner, to collaborate. And if you don't, and if you're on opposite sides of an issue, then it's just, it's a honest discussion. Hey, Joe, I'm just going to let you know, I'm going to push back hard on this bill that you're bringing, and here are my 3 reasons why.
Is that kind of how you see the U.S. Senate possibly could work with independents in it?
I do, and I think the theory of change, and as you noted, there's five of us that are running as independents for the U.S. Senate. We're all veterans. So Seth in Montana, Dan in Nebraska, Brian in South Dakota, Ty in Mississippi, and me. And I think here's how we see the math and the importance of being an independent in the Senate. So. When you look at the makeup in the Senate right now, it's 53 Republicans, 45 Dems, 2 independents. Because the National Dem Party's kind of given up on little red states like Idaho and the Dakotas and Wyoming. I think that most folks say the ceiling for the Dems in the Senate is about 48. So just assume they pick up 3, then it's 50, 40, 48, and 2.
Yeah.
And in the Senate, nothing changes. But if 2 out of the 5 of us win, then it's 48, 48, and 4.
Yeah.
And this is the idea of creating an independent caucus that sits in between. It really would operate as the fulcrum in the Senate by denying a majority to either party. And I think that's how
it becomes a parliamentary system, basically.
It does, Dustin. That's exactly right. And for us, the priorities are we've got to get the institution running again. We just can't continue to operate like we are right now, which means I think breaking the power and the money behind both of the parties. And honestly, I think we've got 3 big constitutional amendments that we need to get done. We need to do term limits and age limits. We need to ban gerrymandering and probably replace it with something like proportional representation. And then we've just got to get money out of our elections. We're just completely losing the voice of the people. And I think when you look at the history of constitutional amendments in the country, they kind of come in waves, right? I mean, we went 60 some odd years until the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments after the Civil War. We did another period until the early 1900s. And then we had another period of constitutional amendments in the 50s and 60s during the civil rights. But if you take the 27th Amendment and you push that aside, this is the second longest time in American history that we haven't had any constitutional amendments.
Yeah.
And I've been all over the state, all 44 counties. I've got folks from across the political spectrum coming to my town halls, and everybody, Dustin, in Idaho agrees on the same thing. Congress is corrupt. We got to get it functioning again. And this rigged economy is putting everyone's economic benefits at risk.
Yeah.
I think people see this steady decline over the last 30 or 40 years in terms of the quality of life in the U.S. and what's happened. And we've just got to get Congress functioning again. And I think these 3 constitutional amendments are how we do it. Interesting.
So tell me how the proportional representation, how you'd see that work.
There's a couple of ways to think about that. And it is, as you noted, it's kind of you see this more in parliamentary systems. But if you look at a state of California, the Democratic representation in Congress surpasses, Democratic voting population.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's gerrymandering and some other stuff that's going on. But if you have a proportional representation, which is, you're selecting the representatives of the state as a function of the votes cast, rather than the single district, who wins in the single district, you get a better representation of the electorate, and therefore I think a more accountable Congress.
And would that then still be representatives from districts, but determined by basically the portion of the vote for that state?
Effectively, but there's a bunch of different ways to do it, and I think that the devil's in the details on this, but I think we can all agree that we reached peak gerrymandering.
Yeah,
and it's not good for the country.
We haven't quite reached the peak of it. We have an election in a few weeks here in Virginia, and I think that will be the peak. We are going to possibly go from we may go into the field with our own public survey to see where things actually are. There's not been much polling on this, but the last poll I saw was the no was ahead, but I don't necessarily trust that poll. But it's possible we could go down in a state that voted 47% Republican, could go down to 1 or 2 out of 11 members of Congress being Republican, which is shocking. I mean, I think that will be peak gerrymandering. And you're right about California has a lot to do with the overall gerrymandering effect within Congress. Based on the 24 election, Democrats hold a gerrymandering advantage of about 7 seats, which is a 14 seat swing because if they go one way or the other. So that's a pretty big advantage right now. But it could actually become with that it would be another 8. So that's 22. That's a lot.
Yeah,
That's
agreed. And it's not good for the country,
mhm. Yeah.
right? And it runs counter to how just the how we've organized our system of government and the expectations of representation.
Well, it's a
We
rigging of the
can't tolerate
system ultimately.
it is. I mean, straight
And
up, it
and
is.
and that's just something that it's been with the country since we've started. We've had redistricting and gerrymandering for a long time, but there's all sorts of other things that happen in the political system that are, you change the rules of the game, you change the game, and I think independents in particular are the most aware. As you know, we've been involved in the independent movement to an extent, and we'd like to see more independents run and do well. I'm a Republican and prefer more Republicans to Democrats, but generally, having a system that allows for independents to run is important in my estimation, and it gets you more ideas, and it's a good thing. I'd like to talk about Idaho specifically and talk about what are important to Idahoans. What are the issues that you're hearing about when you're out talking to folks? You talked a little bit about it a moment ago, but what's unique to Idaho that maybe people around the country wouldn't hear about that much?
Well, I think just a couple with folks that aren't familiar with Idaho, just a couple facts. So, the ag industry is 17% of our state's economy, so it's incredibly important. It's a state of 2 million people and 2.5 million cows. So dairy and the beef industry are incredibly important. And 62% of our lands are owned by the federal government, are public lands. And I'll tell you what, I mean, those public lands are sacred in Idaho. That's why we live here. We love being out. We raise our kids on public lands. We all grew up on public lands. And protecting those public lands is perhaps the most consensus issue in this state. But economically, it's gotten really tough here.
Yeah.
And I hear more and more, particularly from younger Idahoans, that I may be making a little bit more, but I'm earning less. And Idaho used to be kind of a medium wage, low cost state, and now we're a low wage, high cost state. Boise and Coeur d'Alene up north in the Panhandle, 2 of the least affordable housing markets in the country.
Wow.
And when you're looking at it from a purchasing power parity standpoint, but by my math, about 60% of Idahoans don't earn a livable wage. And so economically, it's really tough. And I think the bargain that particularly for Idahoans that voted for President Trump, and 2/3 of Idahoans did, they hoped that President Trump would bring these kind of changes to their economic situation. Because everybody's frustrated. Everybody again just sees this rigged economy, and it hasn't happened. Our ag industry, particularly with what's happened around fertilizer and diesel prices, row crop prices were incredibly bad in 2025. Now you've got this big spike in input, and it doesn't look like any of the crop prices are going to recover. It's going to be a really ugly year for most of Idaho's ag industry, and that's what drives the state. So we've got a lot of work to do to get Idaho back on track.
What makes Idaho unique and Idaho special that's different than other states?
Um, I think Idaho's a center right state. Always has been, always will be, as opposed to like Oregon and Washington, and Montana tends to be a little more purple. And I think those are the core values in Idaho. The Idaho that people remember and then that people value is one where if you're rigged stuck in the mud, nobody's going to ask you about your political party to help out.
Yeah.
You do your thing. We respect your personal decisions, and and we take care of our communities and we take care of each other. I mean, that's the Idaho that I just hear again and again from Republicans and Dems and independents that we want to return back to. And I think that's why folks from across the political spectrum are so excited about this independent race.
Well, and I want to come back to this independent movement. And what is it that's unique about what you're doing, or Seth Bodner, or some of the other folks you mentioned? As I understand, you all talk to each other and share ideas. In a way, you have to have your own kind of party apparatus of the independents, supporting each other, because it was, I was talking about, in a way, a rigged game. The part of the rigging is of the parties. And oftentimes they support each other. Like there's oftentimes when there's maybe a proposed rule change to how elections might be done in the state. Surprisingly, you might have Republicans and Democrat party apparatus or people who work in the parties agreeing because it protects their parties. It protects parties. And, so part of that is to make it harder for there to be threats to a party system. So you have to kind of come up with an independent campaign movement and support structure. And it sounds like you all are supportive of each other. So tell us a little bit about that. Like how can independents help each other?
I mean, listen, as you know as well as anybody, it's very hard to run an independent campaign.
Mhm.
It's much more of a grassroots movement. But you have to put all the party infrastructure in place. Now, in small states like ours out here in the Mountain West, the parties aren't big organizations to begin with, and they're small states, so
That's
it's
very
it's
true.
all it's a solvable problem. But I think the big thing for us is just when you look at the numbers, and Pew had some good numbers on this. 84% of Americans think that Republicans and Democrats just want to fight with each other. They don't want to solve anything. I think it was 91% are politics exhaust them.
Yeah.
And here's the one that just really it hurts, honestly. And these were Pew numbers again. Only 10% of Americans had hope for the future. We can't
Yeah.
continue as a country like this if people are so disenchanted and so disengaged. And we've just got to we've got to push back against that. And again, nowhere in the Constitution does it talk about political parties.
Yeah.
And all of us, we've all served in the military. I was a tank commander. There were 4 guys in my tank. My loader was from Baltimore. My gunner was from Louisiana. My driver was from South Carolina. 4 random guys thrown together, as always happens in the military.
Yeah.
And if we didn't get together, we'd be dead. If we couldn't work together, we would fail our missions. And I think it's that spirit that we've all had in the military, all 5 of us, is what we're trying to bring to this race. And honestly, what we're trying to bring back to making policy in this country.
So all the 5 independent candidates are all military.
We're all veterans. Yep.
Excellent. That's great. Well, it's you need to have also that esprit de corps and the opportunity to have someone to talk to in a campaign. It's not easy, and this is just part of what this program's about, is pulling back the curtain. There is the very basic things an independent candidate will struggle with is, how do you get a voter file? If you are not a U.S. Senate candidate, but you're a candidate for some other level of government, maybe city council, you might never actually easily get a voter file. You may not know how to do that, and if you do, you go to the elections department, and this is important for your mail or for texting or something like that. You may not be able to find vendors that will work with you.
That's a big one.
Yeah, a fundraising platform can be very difficult. How do you go about fundraising when Act Blue is a Democrat, Win Red is the Republican? Not that there's anything wrong there. I mean, it makes sense for the parties to have their own fundraising platform, but there's not enough independence for there to be the independent fundraising platform. There are options, but what are the kind of struggles that you've run into being an independent and having to pull that together? Because we will have independent candidates who will watch this episode and they will want to learn from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. I mean, you went right down the list, Dustin, and we figured out how to do this. We've got a good team. We've got what I've tried to do is build a campaign team that just represents Idaho. So, got a couple folks on the campaign team that have run Republican campaigns in the state, a couple that have run Dem campaigns. We've got some folks that have participated in the national independent movement. And we've had our fits and starts about finding a voter database and CRM platform that we can use. We figured it out, and I think we're in good shape. And we've got well over 1,000 people that have signed up as volunteers all over the state. I'm showing up in conservative rural counties, and we're getting great turnout.
Yeah.
And I think I do honestly believe that Americans and Idahoans in particular are ready for a return to a politics of pragmatism, a politics of where it's just not an exercise in division, but it's let's work together to solve hard problems. And that's just, that's how I'm wired. I absolutely love Idaho. I love the people of Idaho. We can do a lot better than what we're doing right now. And what I tell folks, sometimes people show up and they try and position this as an anti-Trump campaign. I'm like, absolutely, time out. President Trump is, there's a bunch of stuff where we can criticize President Trump for, but there's been some good executive orders on going after the big four meat packers and prohibiting private equity ownership of single-family homes. And there's some things in here that like we need to acknowledge that if a Dem is criticizing President Trump and something like that came from President Biden, you'd say, oh, that's good policy, And I'm trying to call this out. But the big thing is that this is a campaign about Idaho. It's a campaign about the Senate, and ultimately, it's a campaign about just adhering to our constitutional responsibilities.
What's your impression of John Fetterman as a U.S. senator?
I think Fetterman seems to be trying to find his place in the Senate. He's got a different approach from what I would do. I tell you, the people that I'm really impressed with, and I do think there is a beginning to see a realignment of the politics. Anti-monopoly and corporate concentration and fixing our rigged economy is really important for me. The two leaders on anti-monopoly policy, Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts and Josh Hawley from Missouri. I think Senator Hawley's doing some of the best work in the Senate on going after corporate abuse. I'm really, really impressed with him, and look forward to working with him. And then, of course, like on the Epstein files, right? It's Representative Massey and Representative Hanna from California. I think these are the shoots of what we need to see in Congress. And as an independent, that's exactly the lane I'm focused on, is just working with everybody to solve these hard problems.
Interesting. Well, my impression is Fetterman's about the only possibly true independent in the Senate these days. We have a question from the audience. Andre says, what are some ways that independent candidates can overcome the obstacles they face now?
Well, you've got to effectively build your own party infrastructure. In small states, I don't think that's a huge lift, to be honest. And we're doing a great job of building that out for our campaign. Fundraising's hard. You got to run a really frugal campaign. I've been traveling the state in my van and camping out. Diesel is one of our biggest campaign expenses. And, you gotta run a really lean campaign and just focus those dollars you raise. And you've got to represent your state, right? You got to understand what's important to voters in your state, and be that voice for them.
Well, and my answer for Andre would be, my wife works for RFK Jr. and, obviously ran as a Democrat, ran as an independent, and then is now in the Trump administration. And my impression, there's a lot of people from lots of different walks of life. They're all, in the Trump administration now, people who were very far left-wing Democrats and people who were true independents, people who are just people you wouldn't expect, people who might be anti-monopoly types. There's all sorts of different folks. And really, it is the big idea. It's the make America healthy again. There's a vision that's very clear, and that is what coalesces all sorts of different kinds of people, which in your speaking, I can hear that's one of the things that you're trying to present, is ideas that people can coalesce around. And that's one of the ways I think any kind of candidate, honestly, can overcome any obstacles. We talk a lot about tactics when it comes to campaigns, but people say, well, why did Obama win in 2008? People talk all about the social media. Well, that was just that was the new technology of the time. If he didn't have a message, hope, change, and all that, people wouldn't have. The social media wouldn't have mattered. Same thing with Make America Great Again in 2016. People talked about the memes and using Twitter at the time. That's all well and good, but if there's not an idea for it all to hinge off of, it doesn't really matter. So I would say that's true for any campaign anywhere, is you have to have that vision that pulls people together. And it looks like you're creating that for yourself in Idaho, and that's how you're bringing people together.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more, Dustin. And it is ultimately about, fixing Congress has to happen. Honestly, I don't believe we're going to make it to our 260th birthday if we don't get things going again. And both parties are culpable in that.
Yeah.
And then we've got to fix the economy. I mean, there's we haven't seen this level of wealth inequality since the Gilded Age, and it's affecting everybody, right? And when you look at the wealth, and we still have a kick-ass economy, but when you look at where the wealth that's created and where it goes, it's not going to the people that are doing the hard work. And I think this is a very conservative perspective on the economy. I was gassing up when I was out in eastern Idaho a while ago, and went into the C-store and talked to the manager there. It was late at night. It was just me and her. She was about my age. She's making $19 an hour in a part of the state where 23 is a livable wage. No health care, working until midnight. She's been managing convenience stores for over a decade. And she was really struggling. We had a good conversation, but she wasn't getting by. And so I looked at the financial statement for this company, Sinclair Oil, the next morning, made $28 billion of revenue in 2024, and they had $1 billion in net income. And what they do with that $1 billion in net income? Share buybacks. They sent it back to their institutional investors. And if you just do a very simple cut of that $1 billion in net income against their number of employees, it's an incremental $5,000 or $6,000 a year for the employees. And that would have made the difference between her, relying on the social safety net to be able to get by because she wasn't earning a livable wage, and what it takes for her to be able to stand on her own. And I think these are very conservative principles that we've got too much corporate socialism going on. Walmart's another example in Idaho. 1 in 8 of Walmart employees gets their health care from us, from Idaho taxpayers, in the form of Medicaid. Walmart does $3 billion of revenue in Idaho. I mean, these are the sorts of things that honestly, no good conservative should allow to have happen. And unfortunately, I think our Republican representation, our Republican in Congress have lost sight of these kind of conservative values. And that's what I intend to bring back. And I think that's an important part about getting the economy and making America great again, honestly.
Yeah. On the Sinclair example, what you're saying, would that some of that the shareholders would be also retirement plans and possibly employees as well, right?
Not so much, honestly. It's mostly just the big institutional investors like BlackRock and Vanguard and the others.
And then you're absolutely right. It is. There's absolutely there are corporations who use us, the taxpayers, to basically fund healthcare plans and everything else. That's how they get by with those things. Two things that you're talking about Congress. We have currently a partial government shutdown in TSA. You have voter ID, which is wildly, popular, and can't even, Republicans have a majority in name only, honestly, but they can't even get that passed. Like this, these are two things. People want the government open. People want voter ID, and these things are incapable of being done.
This is why I think this fulcrum is so important, that the independents could form. And I think it's more than just the four of us that, or whatever, 6 of us that would be independents. I think there's a couple from the Republican caucus that would come over and join the independents. I think there's a couple from the Dem caucus that would come over and join the independents. And I think this could really be a force for renewal and rejuvenation of Congress, because these sorts of things, I mean, listen, I think ICE practices are, as we've seen around the country, they're bad. And the judges have called them out again and again, that, particularly the use of administrative warrants instead of real judicial warrants.
Oh, that's not possible though. Like the federal law has it set up for administrative warrants. I mean, that's
it does.
It's a bit of I don't know how to say this. That's a polite way to say it. When people use the idea of a judicial warrant, that is basically going to prevent the ICE operations, because you will not be able to process that, and there's not currently a system for that because it's always been done administratively.
There is, but remember, there's 2 key clauses of the functioning of ICE. One is sort of the use of administrative warrants when you're down along the border and the person's a flight risk. But when and the precedent is, and we've saw some court cases in Idaho here as a result of some ICE actions. When there's somebody that's been in the country, and the judicial warrants are the way that's gone after them. Unfortunately, I can't remember the two clause numbers, but I think that the short version is, if an undocumented person in this country commits a felony, out, right? Get them out as fast as we can. There should be no question on any of that.
Yeah.
But I do think there's some ways in which ICE is operating. They're not appropriately trained. I actually wrote an op-ed about this with a friend who was a longtime career FBI officer. That we just got to make sure they're operating professionally. To me, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I don't have many complaints about ICE personally, but I have complaints about the Biden administration. They're the ones who caused this problem. They threw open the borders on purpose, intentionally, to rig the system. To be quite frank, I mean, this is all about reapportionment and redistricting. That's all this is about. This is to bring in more House representative districts to blue areas versus red areas. I mean, that's what this is about. And unfortunately, until we deal with how we actually draw districts based off of population and not based on citizens, there's a game there that it makes sense to get as many people into blue areas as possible in order to have more representation in Congress. And that's the whole game here, which is terrible, but that's what it is.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think the Biden administration did a lot of long-term damage by not securing the border. But this is, I think, unfortunately, the Dems.
We have people now having to clean it up, and it's not an easy thing to clean up the mess.
Yeah, and we have to have a secure border, and I think what's happened in this administration, secure the border, is good. I think there's other ways in which we're executing immigration policy right now that are inconsistent, that a lot of judges have weighed in on. I'll be happy to have that debate with you on that one, but
unfortunately, you can't get a time machine and go back in time. I was on the border in the last few months of 2024 when it was some of the worst it had been. That summer had actually been the worst, but it was shocking to see what actually happens. And the cruelty of the Biden administration was remarkable. There was a case from that time period. The wall had been built, at least in partial in places, and the technology had been put in. It's not just a wall. There's all sorts of different technology. There's fiber optics that runs through the wall. The Biden administration chose not to turn on the technology. And there was a case that happened like a few weeks before we'd been there, where the cartels are smuggling these people. It's a huge business for them, multi-billion-dollar business for them, which has been disrupted, which is why they're trying to bring people in other ways now. But they were smuggling people through, and they had gone over the wall. And a woman who they were smuggling, she got her ankle caught in the wall, and she ended up hanging from her ankle on the wall. The cartel person left her. Had the Biden administration turned on the fiber optics, the Border Patrol would have been notified immediately that there was activity. Instead, they found her days later, dying basically of crucifixion on the wall. And it's just the level. I mean, I find that to be cruel. And I find border security to be, the actual compassionate thing, to make it hard to do things the wrong way. And to, ultimately we need to do the other side of it, which is make it easier to do it the right way. And that's a whole nother part of the breakdown of the system. But anyway, it's unfortunate. I think more people need to get educated as to what was actually happening and how much the cartels controlled, and still in some cases control parts of the border. It's people had no idea the level of activity that was happening down there at the time.
No, I agree. And it's in Idaho, our economy is way bigger than our population. And we need a functional immigration system to keep the Idaho economy going. So, as I talk with my friends in the ag industry, right, you need a good fence, you need a gate that works, right? We fixed the fence, we fixed these illegal border crossings, and I think that's good. But the gate's still busted. Our dairy industry is huge in Idaho. They don't do things on a seasonal basis. They need we need a visa system that supports Idaho's dairy industry. And just saying 100% no to, good folks coming in who want to work hard for a year, that's not a solution.
Yeah.
And then not fixing the visa system is also not a solution. I think Senator Lankford started some really good work. I would be, I'd be happy to work on with him, and let's get this thing functioning again. But we just, one of the things we just got to make sure, and this happens again and again, that immigration isn't used as an excuse to lower wages. When folks come in, Idahoans got to have the first choice on a job. It's got to be a livable wage. And if a dairyman can't fill it, great. Then he can be responsible for a dozen folks that come up from Mexico that work. He's accountable for them. And just pay them a living wage that doesn't suppress wages across the state. I'm
and
fine
make
with that.
sure
There's a
that they're
path.
not treated poorly also.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm, there's a path to solve this thing. We just got to stop using it as a political football to score points.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to be mindful of your time because you need to make fundraising calls. As every candidate knows, that's part of the process. People don't know where you're sitting right now. Probably you spend most of the day making fundraising calls. Be my guess. So the key here is to let people know how they can get involved. And I know we actually have a good number of folks in the Mountain West who are in our audience, and in particular in Idaho. So if you can tell people how they can get involved.
Yeah. Well, you can hit our website, achillesforidaho.com. That's FOR. We've got a big push on signing up with volunteers, and obviously, as Dustin knows better than anybody, fundraising is a big part of these campaigns, particularly for an independent. But we're excited. We got folks all around the state really excited about this movement, and we got some great polling back that shows there's a path to win. So folks are tired of the old politics. Come on down.
Very good. And on your website, is there any information that's the PPP poll? I'm pretty sure you're talking about.
Yeah, it's actually I don't think it's on the website. It's on our social media handles.
Okay.
Well, we've posted some of the new stuff on the PPP poll, but that's a good reminder. We'll get it up there.
Very good. Well, people can go to achillesforidaho.com, and that's 2 L's in there. And Todd, really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing your vision for Idaho and for the country, and giving people a little bit of a view of this independent movement that we see in states across the country, and that it's real, and that there are credible people who are running as independents. And I think a lot of our audience are going to really appreciate getting to hear your story today. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate the time, and thank you for all you're doing too.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. So hope you enjoyed that conversation with Todd Achilles, candidate for U.S. Senate in Idaho, and learning about his background, his take on things, and learning about this independent movement that we're seeing across the country. It's a real thing, and we saw it even in the last election cycle in Nebraska with the Osborne race. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening around the country that maybe in your state you're not seeing this, but there are a real movement to get independent candidates elected, and some of them have been elected in different parts of the country. Maine, Alaska. There's been a number of independents who've been elected. So anyway, if you're interested in that, you should check out achillesforidaho.com and learn more about his campaign. And Todd's a great guy. We really appreciate him spending some time with us today and sharing his views on things. And of course, if you like the program, if you'd like to help more of these episodes get to more people, then the way to do that is to like, share, and subscribe, and follow our podcast on wherever you enjoy your podcasts. If you'd like to be notified when we do a live stream, just hit that little notifications button on whatever social media you follow us on, and then you'll be notified when we go live, and you can have your questions asked. And of course, if you go to our polling club, you can be a part of American Pulse's public polls, as well as internal polls. You can help direct questions, topics. We're going to be doing a lot of U.S. Senate races. Maybe we'll go and do one in Idaho to see what's happening there. Todd talked about the PPP poll. I think you should check that out. Hopefully they get that on their website, because I think that's fascinating to see what's going on in that race. But maybe we go there. I think we have a few coming up in the South. We have some primaries happening that I think are going to change the complexion of the Republican caucus within the U.S. Senate. So that's going to be interesting to see what's happening there. But I think Andre was a question from the polling club. So thank you, Andre, for participating in the conversation. But we're going to be having more of these sorts of candidate profiles, and I encourage people to check each of these people out and learn more about it. So with that, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Todd Achilles, and for checking his website out and seeing if you'd like to support that. And with that, thank you, and we'll see you on the next Political Trade Secrets.
Join us next time by subscribing on iTunes and get show notes and sign up for our newsletter at politicaltradesecrets.com.